Technical writing at SUSE, cherry picking Pete behind the scenes. It's me and Jana, and just a few interesting things that we've done over the past couple of years, 18 months, I guess. Yeah, so Jana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, yes. I'm Jana. I'm project manager on the documentation team. I basically manage the new documentation portal. If you haven't checked it out yet, visit our booth. We'll gladly show you around. Otherwise, just visit documentation.suse.com and have a look yourself. Also, I'm doing analytics and SEO on the team, so I have multiple hats, as pretty much everyone does. And over to John.
Right. For those who weren't at my last talk, I've been a few years at SUSE. I work on the Rancher technical documentation side, part of the new documentation team under the auspices of PSS, which I believe stands for Product Solutions and Services, or something like that, maybe. Okay, so yeah, that's us, and we're here to talk to you about cherry picking. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about documentation architecture, information architecture. There's the sort of stuff that we should be thinking about all the time when we're constructing documentation, working on documentation. Jan's going to talk SEO, and then I've got a couple of things I'd like to talk about. Diagramming as code, which we started to get into about 18 months ago. I think I started with Hack Week, October-ish 2023, having a look at this sort of thing. I want to talk a bit about regular expressions, which I used extensively in a transformation project, Longhorn to Docusaurus. And the tie-in that has with SUSE and open source, and the SUSE values, community, trust, innovation, and choice. And English in the international technical audience, I'll talk a little bit about, and then it'll be back to Jana for some documentation analytics and wrap up and some questions, hopefully. So I will now... Right. So the primary purpose of documentation, product documentation at SUSE, and anywhere that does documentation, it should all be about enabling a customer to use your stuff effectively. So we have questions about the technical nature of the product, what problems they solve, what features do they have, who's the customer, the personas that the customer has, developers, users, administrators, managers, all different needs and perspectives, and we need to keep this in mind when we're writing our stuff. What needs to be done with the product? Install, use, manage, update, uninstall, all activities that need to be documented. Now, historically, on the Rancher side, we used Diataxis, previously known as Divio, to divide up our documentation, provide some structure, and this goes into explanations, tutorials, how-tos, and references. Things are a little bit different on the SUSE Linux side. Historically, they've done it a little bit different, more into content reuse, a more advanced stage of content reuse, and lastly, so that's all about documenting engineering. And the other thing we do, and it's the least important part of our work conceptually, but it takes up an awful lot of time, and that's engineering the documentation. So we have Git flows, continuous integration, static site builds, Markdown, ASCII-Doc, etc., etc., etc. All of these things need to be done. Like I said, it's conceptually the least important part of the work, but it takes up an inordinate amount of time. I mean, your documentation can be great, but it needs to look good as well, and needs to be accessible, needs to be usable. So the engineering helps with all that. So keeping all that in mind as a bit of background, I'm going to take a look at some cherries of interest. So I'm going to pass over to Jana now to take a look at SEO.
Yay. So yeah, SEO is some of our writers' favorite because it's someone you have to do, and it's quite tedious at times, but it's very beneficial because you spend an awful lot of time engineering your documentation, make it look nice, have the greatest thoughts about structure and flow and all that stuff, and nobody will ever find it if you don't mind your keywords, if you don't mind your structure, and if you don't put the SEO work in and basically feed it to Google and make it happy. Of course, Google will never ever reveal how exactly they are weighing things, but there are a few things that you can do, and there are a few things that we do. And the benefits that you, as our readers, hopefully get from our SEO endeavors is that the hits you get on Google, that they are relevant, that they are trustworthy because they are getting backlinks, and basically that they get around. Also, SEO work helps us to improve the user experience, not in the UI way, but in the structural way. Using your header smartly and having great TOCs and stuff makes your users happy because they can navigate better. So that's another benefit of SEO work. Also, putting work into the accessibility realm and into responsiveness of your site, which is not technically SEO as such. Maybe it's like a corner of the whole thing, but it's very important. Google will never ever like a site that takes ages to load and stuff like that, so it's in there as well, but we highlight the accessibility part later on anyway. So what do we do when we live SEO? Of course, there's tools, and those Lighthouse users amongst you, they will know Lighthouse. We, of course, monitor our keywords with Google Search Console, and there's Google Trends for those pit them against each other cases. So we use a commercial tool like called Site Improve now, but it could be any other tool that's out there. I mean, take your pick. To monitor SEO performance, technical and content SEO, we maintain a keyword database. Thank you very much, Dasha. She's our editor-in-chief, and she's doing that great work. And also, Dasha and I keep educating our writers and updating them on things they might take care of or look out for. Yeah, and if we can, like we did with this portal relaunch, we try to improve the code itself of the page so we get better performance out of it. It's an ongoing effort, but then again, SEO as such is an ever ongoing marathon anyway, so the performance part is just a little part of that as well. And over to John for the diagramming as a code.
Thank you. Right. So diagrams as code, we like documentation as code, and diagrams as code, extension of that. If we can describe diagrams as in text, it's editor agnostic, just ASCII, plain text, and entirely suitable for version control. Okay, so it's a documentation as code. It's a process that's in sync with and familiar to the product developer. So we're very keen on having our engineers contribute to the documentation and be responsible for the documentation, and we help them do that. We help them do a good job. So Documentation is code, great for maintenance, code change, development history, regression, all that stuff. So part of documentation of software products, it often requires some sort of architectural description. And diagrams, we don't want diagramming to exist as something completely separate to the normal flow of documentation. So by which I mean breaking out to use tools like Inkscape or the GNU image manipulator. They're fine tools, but they're pretty complex, and I personally find them difficult to use, and I'd sooner have something that was more in sync with what the engineers are doing. So they're very happy being programmers to describe architecture as text. Okay, so as an example, this is, did actually have that smiley face in this diagram as well. I'm not quite sure why, but this is keyboarding and architecture description, and I inherited this a couple of years ago, and I took it to the developers and I said, well, what's all this about? And nobody knew anymore because it had been done a few years ago and it just existed as a PNG, and nobody knew what tool had been used to create it, and nobody knew what it really meant anymore, like Kubernetes control plane and data plane, what are they doing in dash boxes down there, what's that all about? And so needed something that's a bit of an improvement to that. So diagrams as code. So this is Mermaid, which conveniently Docusaurus supports, and Tora supports as an extension. So all our diagrams done in this mechanism. If you were at the earlier talk about migration from Markdown to ASCII doc, all this stuff just transfers straightforwardly. And it's basically a lot like programming language, subroutines, linking things together. And when you run this through a Mermaid processor, that's the sort of documentation that generates that image, which makes sense to the developers now. They know what it means, and they like the description of it. They find it's easy to maintain, much more so than getting them to try and use Inkscape or anything else of that nature. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about regular expressions, long history with regular expressions. So a large documentation set migration, Longhorn from Hugo into Docusaurus. This took place very early part of last year, and although the process was completed, it wasn't moved into production because we decided to do things a bit differently, moved to ASCII doc for some of this production, for some of the product documentation. So one of the problems that cropped up when moving from Hugo to Docusaurus is in Longhorn it had that current version in the handlebars thing, and that's scattered right throughout the keyboard and documentation in many different versions, and that is populated by Hugo with whatever the current version is, and the current version is described by the path, so whatever path component is there, so some documentation path version 1.61 and then some content path after that. So that's what Hugo populates that current version with, and we could have gone through the markdown that was transformed to Docusaurus, found every instance of current version and replaced it with 1.61 in this particular example, but we'd also have to do it for 1.62 and 1.70, etc., etc., etc. So we didn't want to have to do that. So needed a mechanism for replacing that current version with something else. Okay, so used a regular expression to process the path to get the current version, and then do something very similar within Docusaurus, so some JavaScript and some regular expressions were necessary. And another problem was to change all instances of the way Hugo inserts HTML figure into the statically generated HTML, and needed to change that to Docusaurus's preferred way of doing it. A picture, the alt text, and a path to the image in the round brackets. And again, I thought regular expression was a suitable way to do this. So regular expressions came about. I'm going to talk a little bit about history. Stephen Klein, a mathematician and logician in the 1950s, came up with the idea that a regular expression is used to describe, a regular language can be completely described by regular expressions. And Ken Thompson, the sort of inventor of Unix, along with Dennis Ritchie, in the 60s and 70s, developed a tool called, which we still, obviously use today, called grep, based on the command that you use in the ed editor, G, looking for a regular expression and then print it. And this all took place at the hotbed that developed Unix at Bell Labs. 80s and 90s, Perl and TCL, leading up to Perl compatible regular expressions, which all languages have libraries for these days. So academic origins, open source story. I refer back to my shirt, which says choice, innovation, trust, and community. The common things here. So in the academic world, you have peer review, same in open source. So a common way of doing things. What initially attracted me to open source in the first place was this academic feel to it, this scientific endeavor, and helping each other out and being visible and open about what we were doing and building on the building on the work other people are doing. I think Newton was it, who said something about standing on the shoulders of giants, and apparently that was a bit of a put down of the guy, Hoyle was it? I can't remember, because the guy whose work he was building on was disabled and has a hunchback, and I think he was trying to get at him, apparently. Okay. So going back to that, extracting 1.61 from the path, or 1.70 or 1.72. So use a regular expression which looks for the version, and this construct here, CG underscore Vino, it's a capture group variable, and that stuff that looks like transmission line noise when you were using modems, it's looking for the number and a decimal and a point and possibly other numbers, and it's taking what it finds and puts it in this capture group variable, and then you can use that in a replacement in Python or Perl, or just using sed perhaps even. And the second one, something similar. We're looking for a figure and source and alt, and we're putting it in these variables, source and CG alt. The actual one that was used, a bit more complicated, because source and all can be in any order. I must learn to avoid that. So, used a lot of this sort of stuff. The last thing I wanted to talk about, my little cherries, was English for an international technical audience. Now, when we're taught a language, whether you're a native-born speaker of a language or you're learning a second language, you're encouraged and taught idioms and you use them to display your mastery and command of a language and to communicate information to other people who understand the idioms. So, hold your horses, first used by, well, the first recorded use is, I think, Virgil, and for Roman chariot racing, hold your horses, wait for the start. Now, I think we all have an idea of what hold your horses means. It means wait a little bit, but to really understand it, you need to have more context. You need to know it was about chariot racing originally, so, or perhaps motor racing more recently, horsepower, horses. So these things convey information to other people who understand the idioms that you're using. Okay, so I've got a few examples, and I want to pick a few of them out. Showcase product features. We all use that to say, right, here's our product, here's the things it does. Isn't that great? But showcases originally came from exhibitions in, I think, the 18th, 17th or 18th centuries, and it meant a physical box, glass box, that you would put your stuff in so people couldn't touch it, which is not really the message that you want to give about showcasing your product features. Now, does this matter all that much? Well, it depends. Depends on your audience. Will they understand what you're trying to say, looking under the hood? Another one in common use, so you need to know that we're talking about the details of an implementation, and it comes from looking under the hood of a car at the engine, except hood is an American term, so in America we understand looking under the hood. If you say looking under the bonnet, this is very well understood in the United Kingdom. People in America would wonder why you would want to look under somebody's hat. So glossing over the details. Does everybody understand that we're painting in shiny paint over imperfections? People use it these days to say, when we gloss over the details, we're just going to skip over the details, but that's not really quite what it means. And there's a few others. Clear the decks for action, British naval term from 17th and 18th centuries. Firing on all cylinders, cooking on gas on the river. Cooking on gas is interesting. This arose from a British gas advertising campaign in the 70s in the UK. Cooking on gas is much better. You're really flying when you're cooking on gas. You're doing it so much better than, I don't know, wood fires or whatever came before that. I had an engineer use the ship of Theseus on me, and I had no idea what that meant, so I had to look it up. And you need, you need a bit of a classics background or philosophy background, and it's to do with Theseus sailed a long journey, and his ship was repaired many times, and so there's a philosophical question about, is it actually the same ship? And the engineer in question was comparing the documentation that I had changed for the project a lot to the ship of Theseus, and it was a compliment, I guess. And cherry picking itself, is it to do with picking cherries out of a tree using that mechanical device which you get into and stand on and it raises you up. It's called a cherry picker. Or does it refer to picking the cherry out of a piece of cake because that's a really nice bit? So, yeah, some are internationally widely understood, but best avoided. Know your audience demographics. It's okay to use, but just you have to really think about these things. We want simple, precise language, and it's not open to misinterpretation. And it brings me on to another point, which I became aware of quite recently, and that's that you don't need to be a native English speaker to write great documentation. You need to write clear language. Whether you're born speaking that, whether you learn that language from birth, it doesn't really matter. You need to be able to do that simple, precise language and avoid the possibility of misinterpretation.
I have a question.
Sure.
Since I'm a non-English speaking
Yeah.
because I don't speak English as my native language,
Mm-hmm.
I would use none of those.
Yeah. But you might, perhaps you weren't taught as when learning English that idioms are good to use, but certainly in my experience of learning English, you would use idiomatic language just naturally as part of growing up and as part of your education, and you would be taught that a use of idiomatic language helps another person to whom you're speaking understand what you're talking about.
Well, if I'm speaking, I would probably use
Yeah.
a lot of them, but I wouldn't use them in writing.
Yeah,
But
you'd be
that's
writing.
probably my Swedish background.
That's cool. You'd be writing great documentation then, because it won't have these possibilities for misinterpretation in them. So that's good.
Because in Swedish, this would be called speaking language.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Mm. And thank you. So I will now hand over to.
One small question, John.
Sure.
On the rivet, it
Yeah.
means same, means fast. On the
It does, and that is from cycling. I like to go cycling, and it's from bike racing, and it refers to the old construction of leather bicycle saddles, which had rivets in them holding them to a frame. And there was a rivet right on the point of the saddle, not salad, on the point of the saddle, and when you're going really fast, you tend to be forward over the saddle, so you're sitting on the rivet. So that's where that comes from. Right, Jana, thank you.
Yeah. Off the fun stuff onto the, well, some might find it amusing, but it's rather dry, or can be rather dry, which is why and how to use analytics on documentation, because I mean, it's great to have a SUSE. It's great to get feedback by real humans and to get direct input and to have someone to talk to and ask questions back and really have an exchange, but that's not the norm. I mean, we're sitting behind our desks, maybe not even in an office. We're on our own, and we like to know what the pain points of our audiences are, what topics are relevant to them, what people want to see in the docs. We want to know what we could improve upon. I mean, there's great docs outside, but we might get some input on to even make them greater. Also, analytics will also tell us about any UX issues or UI issues. I mean, if like us, you're developing your stuff in-house, you put a great deal of thinking into the design and you're totally proud of it and maybe totally blind to the real issues. So having something that objectively checks these issues is absolutely invaluable. So you need it. Also, using Google Analytics and stuff to monitor content performance helps you budget more smartly. I mean, there's a fixed localization budget. You have to spend it wisely, or you won't get one next year. So that kind of stuff is what we're doing with analytics. And also, I warned you, the accessibility part is popping back in. Also, of course, on top of feedback we're getting from people with various issues, be it hearing, be it motor issues, be it visibility issues. We need a tool that monitors this performance and that tells us, "Way, you're doing absolutely bullshit on the contrast stuff, and don't forget about the colorblind people and all that stuff." So that are those key areas where we use some sort of analytics solution. Yeah, that's basically it. So how we track relevance and improvement areas. Of course, we check with Google Analytics which content pieces perform great and which might not be performing so great. Looking at our keywords, at our Google Search Console output and all that stuff around them. So keywords, search phrases that people are looking for, they will tell us, well, that's a hot topic and you better do a bit more on that side maybe, or improve on that piece so it ranks higher. The UX issues, there are automated tools that track those things. Heat maps, everybody has seen them, I suppose. They come in handy when, like us, you're designing a UI from scratch. So you see how people are interacting, where they would expect some action and where they don't. It's quite interesting. Yeah, and the accessibility stuff is really providing a UI and providing content that can be passed by people with various issues. So I've brought along a few examples on how we live this kind of analytics mindset. The first example is, how do we find out which topics are the hottest to our audience? There is Maike at our booth, who totally visit our booth and meet Maike. It's quite educational and fun. She is our survey lady. So every year around SUSECon, she will put out a huge and very, very, very thorough documentation survey where you can, if you have issues with it, file them. If you have praise, file it. We're totally glad to see those as well. Then it's the more passive approach. Follow the users after they have seen our stuff, which is track the keywords, queries, monitor the content performance, and also map our data with data from customer-facing teams. So if you, for example, let's link this to the second example, which is spend a localization budget. So if you sell great in an area, and if you are asked to, provide documentation for this area and localize it. So you would check, okay, sales guys, what are your numbers? And then you would look, is this a region one that is very active in the documentation space? If there are other languages relevant to this geo, and do we have localizations for them and all that stuff? Let's say we got a sales team from Asia that wants something translated to Asian languages. They would come in and say, well, let us have it. And we would like do a bit of number crunching. And we would have to evaluate the numbers of how much the the documentation is viewed in those parts of the world versus their numbers, and then they have to kind of make up their minds whether it's worth it. And yeah, this kind of can be quite interesting. And one real-world example that came from this sort of analysis was us dropping support for Italian documentation, because we literally saw, well, it's not needed. Those guys prefer English for whatever reason. I mean, I don't know. But the numbers clearly showed the interest in Italian clearly dwindled, and it wasn't worth it. So that led to the entirety of SUSE dropping this language. You could check the menu on top of any SUSE page, not just the documentation, and there's a language selector, and there's no Italian in it. So that's the backstory, really. And of course, the other teams did similar analysis, and they also said, well, they don't care. And it's nice to contribute something to those kinds of efforts, because money saving is nice, and everybody loves it, and it wasn't really all that big of a deal. Maybe for those poor Italians who preferred Italian documentation it was, but yeah, that's about it. Okay, I mentioned accessibility a lot. So for the Europeans amongst us, hello to Sweden, there is new accessibility legislation coming up in June, which requires you to be compliant to, is it WCAG 2.1 or something? Which basically tells you to be very, very mindful of things like contrast, of things like putting alt attributes on your images, of things like putting headers and descriptions on your tables, so every screen reader and such can really map the data that's in a column to what the column is actually about. And this is where Daria would come in, because we have to educate our writers and really drill it into them, so they kind of put this into their long list of housekeeping items and really follow this. Also, accessibility can be, and that ties into John's point, use simple language. Be as clear and concise as you can be, because not everybody is as mighty and intellectual high flyer as you are. And if you can't express it simply, maybe you haven't understood it. So simplicity over anything. Another great area for improvement, and this is where we are headed. We're pretty much past all these contrast issues. We are educating our writers and really hoping they live by what they promise to live by. But the next stuff would be make these pages tab navigatable. So you have to, there might be people who cannot use a mouse. There might be people who rely on just the tab thingy. And there might be the screen reader people. And all those people, they rely on these area attributes and stuff, and we have to pop them in. We have to simplify the code. And that's what we are at, basically. So we started an accessibility sprint in January, I think. And it's turning into a marathon, but we're making great progress. As you can see, we are currently at 8 points to the end goal out of 100 or so. So we might even be getting there until June. Yeah, so if you come across anything that might look like an accessibility issue, by all means, docteam@SUSE.de with a dash in between, drop us an email and let us have it. Because we're checking mainly with the tool. We're not checking with any screen readers right now. I would totally like to do that, but we're not there yet. So if there's anything you notice, let us have it. I mean, there's things like simulators for color blindness and stuff. That's kind of a hip thing and easy to do. But the contrast issues, I mean, they are behind us. And the bigger fish will be the bigger problem. So if you spot one of those biggies, tell us. And over to John for the wrap-up. That's all I had to say.
Summary there, yes. With findability, interest in findability through that information architecture and SEO stuff, maintainability and automation, diagrams as code, documentation as code, all very important. Clarity, also important. Data awareness, using analytics for performance issues, tracking down those accessibility issues and doing a better job. Yeah. And now I've had a chance to calm down a little bit and think about Eric's question a bit more. There were a few of those idiomatic phrases which are there just for example, but I have definitely come across things like under the hood, gloss over, and in particular showcasing, which I am regularly removing from technical documentation that's provided to me for editing. So, yeah. Okay, so all done. Thank you very much.